People's livelihood has continuously improved. The people-centered philosophy of development has taken roots through implementation of a large number of measures benefiting the people, and people's sense of gains has greatly enhanced. The battle against poverty has made decisive progress, and more than 60 million impoverished people have shaken off poverty.
China's Communist Party came to power promising to end rural poverty. Decades later, President Xi Jinping says he'll make good on that promise by 2020. The challenge? Lift 43 million people out from under the poverty line. In China, that's a man or woman making less than 95 cents a day. And that goal could be within reach. China's poverty rate has halved in the past 5 years. He helped by farming cooperatives, billions of dollars in loans and cash subsidies. But critics say Xi's target is not ambitious enough, arguing that 500 million people don't make enough money for a decent standard of living. Well, to discuss this, I'm joined by Kerry Brown. He's a professor of Chinese studies at King's College, London. Thanks so much for joining us. Kerry, Xi Jinping's made a big promise. He set a 2020 deadline. That's just around the corner. Can he do it?
Well, it depends how he does it. I mean, as you've just said, since 1978, China has lifted enormous numbers of people out of absolute poverty, up to 400 million, according to one analysis, the World Bank. So this is 10% of that, and China is now much wealthier and has greater capacity now. So 2020 is an important date for China. It's the time when it's meant to be achieving middle income status of $13,000 per capita GDP per head. And so having a group of 5% of the population, basically, or a bit under that, 4% of the population who are living in poverty is very embarrassing. So, you know, I'm sure the political will is there, it sounds, and he wouldn't have mentioned it at this Congress last month if he did not feel that there was a realistic chance of doing something about it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of foreigners would go to places like Shanghai or Beijing and be blown away by the prosperity or abundance. But the conventional wisdom is, while that might wow you, that's where most of the wealth is concentrated, in these urban coastal areas, whilst the hinterland is in some places poor, in some places extremely poor. How do they actually solve that riddle and bring prosperity to the middle of China?
So one of the issues really is that the real impoverished areas are in the western region of China. So that is about 400 million people in about 11 provinces, including Tibet, Xinjiang, Gansu, Sichuan. These are huge places. Lack of logistics, so they have tried to build fast trains or train infrastructure. State enterprises rather than very entrepreneurial, although that's also improving. And then, of course, isolated communities. And that's probably the latter is the most difficult, because you've got people in Tibet or in Sichuan or in Yunnan who are living in, you know, kind of places which it would be very expensive to develop them. And the idea really is to have targeted poverty alleviation, targeted programs. China has an enormous amount of knowledge of doing this, so probably very few are better than the Chinese government at doing this kind of targeted relief. But I have to stress, you know, poverty is relative. So you have Beijing, Shanghai, big cities, they look great. There are poor people there too. I mean, they're poor because they are surrounded by people who are much wealthier, and they feel that their lives are not, you know, they're not kind of as they should be. So it gets rid of one type of poverty, absolute poverty. There are other people, though, who are also feeling not like they're winners in this system.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because just like capital, I guess, capitalism, you have the communist system, which is succumbing to some of the flaws of capitalism, where you have inequality, right? So you have tremendously wealthy people. I mean, you have abundance, the economy growing, some people getting extremely wealthy, a lot of people left behind, growing inequality. I wonder, politically, is this more of a priority these days for the Communist Party, given that maybe growing and widening inequality and hundreds of millions of people getting restless and angry at that inequality might cause some cracks in the political system that is really tightly controlled, and they might not have that same buy-in from the population?
Yeah, I mean, Xi Jinping's government have been very aware, as the previous administration under Hu Jintao have been, of the fact that reform and opening up development in the last 40 years has created an enormous amount of wealth and prosperity, but it's been unequally distributed. And so China has more billionaires, probably more dollar billionaires than America, I think, at the moment. It has enormously wealthy people. It has a pretty large middle class, that's for sure. But it still has a lot of people who are disenfranchised. I mean, migrant labourers who don't feel like they've worked very hard, but they haven't got a great deal in terms of social welfare. Pensions that are not being provided to the elderly. So there are left behind communities. There are people in the countryside who feel like they have not been looked after. The very, very poor that we're talking about are a group, but there are plenty of others who might look prosperous but don't feel like they're prosperous, who feel like their future is not so great. There are also retired people whose pensions are not very good. There are people who are living sort of really, really tough lives in cities who, again, on paper might look like they're getting a good, kind of wage every month. But the pressure in China is through rising house costs, rising living costs, rising, everyday commuting costs. Mm-hmm. These are the very similar problems that we have in the West. So, in a sense, this absolute poverty impoverished group is a hold, it's a look back to the old China, and I think that's why they really want to get rid, of this group's problems and address them. But then there's a whole set of new problems that they're going to have to focus on and are trying to focus on.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's been good to get a window into China with you. Professor Kerry Brown, Professor of Chinese Studies at King's College London. Thank you very much for joining us on the Newsmakers.